Okay, we're going to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 Austin Ivy Plus Virtual Speaker Series hosted here in Zoom and streaming live on YouTube from Austin, Texas. My name is Stephanie Pace. I'm a realtor here in Austin and the president of the Alumni Club of Austin, an affiliate chapter of the Alumni Association at UC Berkeley, and an active social and professional networking organization of more than 300 alumni living in Austin, Texas.
Hey, my name is Silky. I'm an engineer and a member of the Cal Alumni Club of Houston leadership team. This event tonight not only represents UC Berkeley, but also represents Austin Ivy Plus, a collection of over 1,000 Austin-based alumni from all the Ivy League schools, the Seven Sisters, and several prestigious private and public universities. Tonight, we're highlighting the incredible work of Austin-based superstar Brook Schaaf. Here's a little bit about his mission and his background.
Brook is the co-founder of Two Successful and several other unsuccessful small businesses. His focus tonight will be with people who have thought of starting a business or currently own one and want to get out. More specifically, he'll be sharing his personal experiences of beginning, buying, and selling.
Brook Schaaf is a 2000 graduate of UC Berkeley. He is the current owner and operator of the company called FMTC. And as a native of Los Angeles, he has lived in the Austin area for the past 9 years, during which time he has been an active member of entrepreneur organizations.
We have one request for our audience. Please mute your audio when our speaker is talking and remain muted until audience Q&A. If audio does become an issue, we'll be forced to remove you from tonight's event.
Okay. See, so here's
Now we're ready to hear from Brook. Take it away, Brook.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Silky. As noted, my name is Brook Schaaf. Thank you all for attending. I'm delighted to share some of my life experience. As noted, I'm a Cal grad, Los Angeles native. I moved out to Austin in 2011. These are some companies I worked at before I became an entrepreneur. Yeah, including Zappos. So I did work with the famous Tony Hsieh, who unfortunately passed away recently. I've been a member of a group called the Entrepreneurs Organization since I moved to Austin. And I'm a current member of the Small Business Administration's Reg Fair Board. So it might be a little bit obscure, but if you have a regulatory issue with a federal agency, let me know. There's a sort of reconciliation mechanism that might be able to help you out. And I live out here in the country, so I'm a part-time chicken rancher. We got some in the backyard. All right, we got a lot to go through, and I'm gonna try and keep it quick. So I wanted to go start by saying what this presentation is and what this presentation is not. As you can see, this is very much oriented to my personal experiences, which I'll go through shortly. So I'm not trying to do operational advice. So this is not an exhaustive checklist. It's not how to hustle up and start a business with sweat equity. Of course, it's not legal advice. It's also not tailored to the COVID economy, which may be, who knows what the long-term effects of COVID will be. Whatever they are, there'll still be, I think, an opportunity for entrepreneurship and for buying and selling businesses. Also, this is not a sales pitch. So I'm not a consultant in this space. I'm not a broker. I'm not an investor or anything like that. So this is all just kind of my shares. Take it for what it's worth. And on that note, I grabbed a bunch of logos from companies I've been involved with. And so these are all companies that either started or was involved in the sale or the end of. A couple that I bought along the way. I've had a 15-year career as an entrepreneur. I had kind of an interesting start. I'll get into that later. And prior to that, in about 2006, I actually started a business right out of school. You can't see it really well because it's blurry in the upper left-hand corner, but it's called Bigger Mock Productions. It was a combination of my friend's name and my name, and we formed a video production company and sold a video to Cal, to Berkeley, our alma mater. And that was my first experience registering a business and handling money in a business and all that sort of stuff. Fast forward a few years, my brother and I started Schaaf Consulting. We bought another company called Partner Centric that became Schaaf Partner Centric. We couldn't think of a better name. There were a couple failed attempts along the way. You can see that bike called Split a Cab that was It was not a proto version of Uber, but it was sort of the ride sharing idea that a friend of ours had, and it never got off the ground. So sort of failure to launch will kind of be a part of this presentation as well. Ditto Trademark. Trademark actually did get built. So it kind of got launched, but it never got anywhere. And that one's a little bit more interesting because other companies that had that exact same business model later came into the marketplace and are still around today. In fact, one got sold earlier this year. Schaaf, Partner-Centric also bought some other companies and books of business, including that company PMG. And then to kind of go over to FMTC, we bought a company a couple of years ago called Copelia, and FMTC launched those below companies, one of which was sold and one of which was shuttered. So, those are all starts and stops. And at the very far right, you can see Prep Dish Personal Chef. That's a personal chef business that my wife owns. I do not own it, but I helped her sell it. So it's in this presentation. So let's back up and ask the question, what is a small business anyway? It's worth noting that there's actually no fixed definition of small business. The closest thing you probably get would be the Small Business Administration, and its definition varies. There's hundreds of codes for your company. You can see I looked one up randomly for orange groves, and they have a little wizard on their site. So if you have an orange grove that's doing $1 million a year in revenue, yes, you qualify as a small business. And this is relevant because it affects financing that you can get in federal or other governmental contracts that you'll be eligible for. Otherwise, some people would typically say, I think, if you ask the average person, they'd say under 50, under 100 people. But in the grand scheme of things, it's more like under 1,000 or under 1,500 people and under $5 or $10 million a year. This does not, I don't mean this to sound bad, but it would be kind of something that would be quote unquote invisible to the larger economy. If Facebook went away, you would notice it. If General Motors went away, you'd notice it. If my company went away, you wouldn't notice it unless you do business with me. This company, Overlow, which I'm not super familiar with them. I don't have any connection to them, but they have some nice slides that I kind of pulled out. I think it's a good reminder of the scope of things. This actually, the small business group that I'm a part of, it's part of the Office of the National Ombudsman. They referenced these slides in a presentation we had last week. So just under 31 small businesses in the US. They create millions of jobs every year. And it's really fascinating to me that the majority of jobs are created by small businesses. And I think that's been true as long as I've been alive. And it really makes a lot of sense. There's sort of, laboratories, there's just so many of them. Again, not quite as visible except in the aggregate. And I think this is the one's a little bit skewed because, again, it's skewed by the number of how many small businesses there are compared to large businesses. But suffice it to say, it's a really important part of our economy, and it could be, a very important part of your life. So on that note, that's a good segue to why start a small business. Now, of course, you could start a small business, or you could buy a small business. This is from a company called Guidance. They did some kind of survey. And they said the most likely reason was to be your own boss. This is not quite my experience. I think the most likely reason that you enter the small business world as an owner is you are clueless. And you eventually go from being clueless to being hard-boiled. And I don't know if anybody remembers this movie, but it was a Hong Kong action movie from the 90s. And I just think for purposes of this presentation, it's perfect the guy is holding a baby because the small business is like your baby. Exits. I didn't find a survey for this one. There probably are ones out there you can kind of look out. But when I thought about my personal experience and I looked up some stuff people had, there's a few really common reasons, right? You might get bored with what you're doing. Or just like burnout. You might not like the role, so you started the small business as the craftsman and now you're like the big boss and you hate being the big boss. I know a guy actually has an SEO business out of Philadelphia. He fired himself as the CEO and now he's like the evangelist. And so he's all over, LinkedIn and does a good job with that, but he didn't like the executive role, which can be hard to stay away from when you're the owner. Sometimes you get an offer. Sometimes that offer is out of the blue. And oftentimes there's a business life cycle issue that kind of comes up. So this company, BCMS, again, I don't have a relationship with these guys. Stuff accumulates over the years. And I thought that this was a really good, very on point sort of diagram about a typical life of a small business. And the idea is that like, if you get a business and it kind of gets wings and it flies up, I've observed that every business kind of has, if it makes it, it's it phase. And so like within your industry, like you're the business, like you're the agency that everybody's talking about for a while. And then that fades away. And when it fades away, it doesn't mean your business has stopped growing or is failing or anything like that. It just means you've kind of gone from the foreground to the background. And I would argue that that's even true with massive corporations like Google or Facebook. Like they're just so big that they're a part of your everyday life. You know, you sort of just breathe them in. They're not something that was, you know, like a movie that caught your attention for a while. And whatever happens kind of past that it phase, it could go different ways, but it could plateau as well. So this is a little bit dramatized, but the reinvestment might be a reinvestment in energy. It could be a reinvestment in capital, but the decay or decline stage is very real. Now, of course, if you're the small business owner and you're looking to exit, you want it to be on the uptrend because a potential buyer would, avoid the stench of death, so to speak. So this is something to be very kind of advised of. You can still exit. That's been a lot of my experience when people do want to leave for those reasons. But then if you're the buyer, of course, you're left kind of, you have to be the one to do that reinvestment or breathe new life into it. You see a lot of stats like this about the high failure rate of small businesses, 95% in the first 5 years. I would take this with a grain of salt because I've always wondered, I've never found this out, but I've always wondered if that's not based on business registrations, because there's a gazillion businesses that get registered as like legal entities that nothing ever happens, right? No bank accounts ever created, et cetera. I don't know how they would determine if those have failed or not. But I got a buddy and he's a restaurant owner. He made it to this magical 2-year mark. And I said, hey, you made it, and he was starting to do new stuff. And I said, hey, why do new stuff? He made it to the 2-year mark. And most restaurants fail by that point. He said, well, they don't then magically stay in business forever. You got to have something new. The vast majority are going to be gone, after 5 years, after 10 years, et cetera. So you do need to kind of get a feel for your business and, what its like long-term likelihood is going to be. But that said, I think statistics like these can be overly discouraging, because when you kind of get in and sort of play the game a little bit, you'll naturally get a feel for the marketplace. You get wiped out by something like COVID, but some stuff nobody can predict, and that might wipe out the AMC movie theater chain among others. So then you're thinking of entering, you're thinking of buying something, you're thinking of leaving, selling, or of course you could just be shutting down. What would you be doing here? And I broke this into preparation, discovery, finance and valuation, negotiating and legal, and emotional, not to be overlooked. So the preparation phase could totally be its own presentation of probably many hours. I mean, you could probably go to a 3-day seminar on this. I included some things that sort of been salient to me in my career. So one thing is your marketplace is going to have certain marketplace conditions, right? So is it a cyclical business? Are you selling Halloween costumes or Christmas trees? Is the market very fragmented? So the space that I come from, which is affiliate marketing, which is basically a form of online advertising, we are still today very fragmented. So my company FMDC now is we sell data basically, in particular coupon data. We track a lot of the players in the space. There's over 200 agencies in our space. That includes big guys and small guys. So that's really fragmented. It's not like a handful of car companies or one power company or something like that. And when the industry is fragmented, that I think typically means that there's a lot more opportunity over time, because there'll be some consolidation opportunities. Or you could always just enter as a new player. It's typically very possible to enter a market with your angle as an agency. By agency, I mean a company that has humans doing some kind of labor, usually information work in our economy. But maybe it's a restaurant. It could be something else too. Somebody who's buying, is going to want to look at your position in the marketplace. Do you have market share? Do you have concentration risk? How's your customer retention? Do you have connections in the ecosystem? So we bought a company that was another agency years ago, and they had eBay as a client, which was a massive with them. It was worth tens of thousands of dollars a month in billings. And that single client was such a big part of the deal that we actually got, with the permission of the seller, we got a conversation with them to say, hey, is this relationship stable? Because it expires at the end of the year. And that sort of worked out. But that obviously is going to be a huge risk for any buyer. And frankly, even if you're not considering selling, if you're if you have some kind of company and somebody's, one client's more than 20% is the usual number, it probably varies by industry, but if somebody's more than 20% of your revenue, you got to watch out, because that could sink you if they go away. And some businesses are strange, right? They have like literally one client that they serve. So, buyers can of course be very tuned into all this. And then also ecosystem connections. That's kind of a soft value that's not to be overlooked. Slack, I saw, sold to Salesforce for over $27 billion, which really blew me away. And I don't track the big sales so much, but that's sure a lot of money. And some of the commentary on that I saw was that, Slack has just thousands and thousands of integrations, which is hugely, hugely valuable, because it, makes things frictionless if you want to connect to different software systems that you're paying for. So there's also those soft human connections in the ecosystem too. Your relationship with company X, you're an approved vendor for company Y, et cetera. The operating agreement may sound a little bit dry. This is something that I could talk quite a lot about as well. But I have learned from personal painful experience that if you are in business with a partner, now you need this even if you don't have a partner, but you can, if you're the sole owner, you can just draft it yourself pretty quickly. But if you're a partner, you really have to, one or more partners, you have to know who has ultimate control, right? Because if you have a 50-50 partnership, what do you do if you're at loggerheads, which is a situation I've been in personally. Or if you have no operating agreement, how do you make decisions? How would you ever be able to sell? And the sooner you can do something like that, the better. And there's a lot of tough questions to ask along those lines too. So a couple classic additional points are, for sale, is there what's called a shotgun clause or drag along, tag along. And what those mean are, the shotgun clause would be like, hey, if Stephanie and I had a business together and I said, hey, I really want to sell, and she said, hey, I don't, I would be able to force a sale. So the idea would be I would hold a shotgun to her head, and I quote a price, and she has to either buy me out at that price or sell to me at that price so that I can go and do something else. Now, hypothetically speaking, there wouldn't need to be somebody to buy. I could just execute the shotgun clause because we didn't want to, be in business anymore or something like that. Not a pleasant discussion to have under most circumstances, but things are going to change if you're in business with somebody over the years. The drag along, tag along is a little bit more obscure, but what that means is somebody else kind of comes in to buy, and let's say Stephanie and Silk and I are in a business together, and one of us is, a 10% minority shareholder, and somebody buys us and they can get controlling interest, but they don't want to have like some 10% holder. That would give them the right to buy that person out. That's the drag along. Or conversely, if the acquirer has no interest in buying them out, they don't want to have some stump portion of a business that they have no control over, they would have the right to tag along. So there's some other standard elements, but you really want to have a good operating agreement. That would be something to put together with a lawyer, because there's some employee or something and they get promised equity or phantom equity, but it's not on paper, and it causes a big kerfuffle later when the business is sold. You don't want to have your paperwork out of order. That can torpedo the business. I bought a company a couple of years ago, and this guy had done these odd shares to people, and it ended up not causing us a headache because it was kind of off. It was kind of not a liability I would have had. But that kind of stuff can come up and bite you in the butt. The management team, if you have a going concern is doing some amount of money and, somebody buys your company, you typically would have some earnout period or some consulting period or something like that. The buyer would typically want to know that there's a really solid management team in place. So when my brother and I sold the agency, we actually sold it to the manager. So we actually sold it to the woman who was the CEO at the time, and she had a whole intact structure. That makes it a lot easier to do the sale because the buyer will be worried about it falling apart. And, again, even if you don't have a buyer, that's something you probably want to have in place in case you get hit by a bus or become incapacitated or something else happens. Board of directors, I've actually never done as much with. It's considered best practice, so I kind of threw it in there. Probably should be on its own sort of standalone bullet point. For smaller businesses, they frankly tend to be advisory boards. Maybe they're compensated, maybe they're not. Sometimes it's kind of for equity that, usually does not turn into something. It's not like you're an early advisor for Google or Facebook or something like that. So that one I've never really played around with as much. I have had advisory boards before, but it is something worth noting that some, and if you do have it, they could also help you to sell. Operational health and financial health are pretty kind of generic. There's a lot more to say about those, but I'm going to kind of gloss over that for now. But you ideally do want to have a set of books. A buddy of mine, he had a company, and he and his partner didn't keep books. They just they had a bank account, and all the money went into the bank account, and they would leave a certain amount in as operating cash, and then just take the rest out. It was an events company, so it was they would just do it a certain number of times, and that totally worked for them for years. But when they finally did sell the business, they had to go back and recreate the books. So they did not get away with that ultimately. So this represents discovery. If you have a business that you want to sell, how does somebody discover you, or how do you find the buyer? And if you want to buy a business that's out there, how do you find it? I don't have as much experience with this, frankly. I have had a number of friends who've sold businesses with brokers, with investment bankers. My own sales have been through the community and through competitors. So the stuff we started was, like the split a cap thing, that was through a family friend that we had, and the trademark thing that I mentioned, and those were both unsuccessful. That one was through we reached out to a friend of my brother's to do the development work. And that actually ended up not working because it moved too slowly, because it was a part-time project. So that's something else to kind of keep in mind. In most businesses that you would sell, they will be to somebody who kind of knows your space, right? And I think that would probably be true of, like a restaurant, probably be true of an agency, probably be true if you had some manufacturing business. They would know you, they would know your business. They would probably pay less than other people potentially would, which I'll get into a little bit later. But that's often a very good sort of trust-bound conversation that you can have. And that also enabled us to do a deal once. So when we bought one of the agencies, we did it as a seller held note because we couldn't get bank financing. This was right after 2008's crash. And I remember we went to this one banker, and he said, well, I can't guarantee that this will work out, but, and then he leans in, he's like, I guarantee it. And of course it doesn't work out. And we tried talking to 7 banks. It's a real disadvantage of agencies. There's no collateral, there's no inventory, there's no land, there's no buildings. So the bank doesn't really have much it can collect on. So we did, because we developed a good relationship of trust over the years, a seller held note with the woman who owned that business. We paid her off on time with interest, and it worked out really well for both sides because she wanted to get out. So the classic way, though, I think to really do it is to get an investment banker. So a buddy of mine, he had a business. It was sort of a software company in the higher educational space. He actually did this twice. And they did the whole thing where you get an investment banker, and they do a whole big book for you. They reach out to a lot of people. Actually, I got some stats from this company, BCMS, that was on that slide earlier. They said that they reach out to 150 to 250 potential buyers for you. From that, they'll yield 4 to 10 serious candidates. So a big drop off, of course. They'll get 4 to 6 bids, and they'll see a spread of 2x from the lowest to the highest bid. And based on my friend shared quite a lot with me, and based on what he shared, that sounds pretty true. So again, I haven't done this myself, but it really seems like if you have an investment banker, they can really shop your deal and find a strategic buyer who would be willing to pay more. Now, the challenge with that is if you have, that's a business that's sold for tens of millions of dollars. If you have a business that's selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars or like low millions of dollars, it might be tough to do that because the percentage could be quite high as a percentage of the total deal. They might have minimum fees or things like that. And of course, they might not be interested in your deal. So I get calls all the time because these companies have, research teams, right? So typically younger employees, interns sometimes, and they just call companies all day long, every day. And they're usually looking for companies that are over 10 million. And I'll usually talk to them, and but what I say now is I say, hey, listen, happy to chat, but just so you know, my company's under 10 million in annual revenue. And that usually stops the conversation right there. so I'm not wasting their time and they're not wasting my time. But it does seem to be a best practice if you have a business of a certain size. Maybe it's not 10 million, but it's probably like 5 million or more in loose numbers. So again, there's, not ironclad rules, but that's sort of what I've seen, what I've heard, what people have said to me. And then lastly, in reverse order, we come back to brokers. So a buddy of mine had a business, a really old school business in the construction space that he did really well with. He modernized it. He brought in modern manufacturing and stuff that had been done by hand previously, and was then kind of looking for something new to start. And I was asking him, like, well, hey, how do you find businesses? And he said, well, basically I just subscribe to all these broker lists. So I think there's like 50 brokers lists, tons of different industries. And he just sees what comes through, because there's no MLS that I'm aware of, at least for small business sales. I mean, there are marketplaces certainly, but that's, going to be specific stuff. It's not for everything. And he was really a really strong due diligence guy. So he would really kind of want to make sure he saw everything. Like in my space, there's a company called Hello Exit. They do online businesses. So if you had some kind of .com, maybe it's a retailer, maybe it's an info site, maybe it's a publisher, he would potentially put that company up for sale. And I just happened to have met him because, he's kind of in my space and he talks at conferences and stuff. There's probably guys like that in every industry, I would imagine. Alrighty, so next up, I picked this slide because for valuation, I think the fantasy, if you have a small business, you want to sell it, is that you'll get retirement money. And I like this one because, the value of these coins does not add up to retirement dollars. And I think that the vast majority of the time, your small business realistically is not going to be worth retirement money. Now, what is retirement money? To each his own, I suppose. But I think most people would say it's, north of north of $10 million if they're living a high consumption lifestyle, spending a lot of money, which a lot of entrepreneurs do, of course. And the typical small business would be worth, some fraction of that. So for example, I would stake a valuation formula of a typical agency. And again, I talk about agencies a lot because that was what I did most of my professional career as an entrepreneur. If you have an agency and it's doing $1 million a year in billing revenue, so not media spend, but the actual billing revenue, then like that would be like billable hours, et cetera. And it's making, call it a 15% profit margin. And somebody was willing to pay, for 3 years profit rounded up, which I think would be a pretty reasonable basis. You'd be at about 50%. So that agency would be worth about half of its top line billing on an annual basis. And having done these deals, again, on the buy and the sell side, I found that to be a pretty good guideline. And so, by that math, you need for the $10 million sale, you want a $20 million agency, which would be quite massive. Now, just to note, I have heard from people who've done bigger deals that when you cross that threshold, 10, 15 million, the multiplier goes up from, say, a 0.5 to maybe a 1 or even a 1.5. And that, again, anchors pretty well to the famous EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, deduction, and amortizations, which is, for simplicity's sake, call it net profit. So that's something to keep in mind. You want to have realistic expectations. So the images here correspond to that, right? I think these are notes from Zimbabwe or some country that suffered from horrible hyperinflation. Otherwise, your business might be able to, buy you a nice house, in this case, a tiny house. And then, of course, some people have very, very big exits. And I definitely know some entrepreneurs who've done that. I also know some entrepreneurs who earn over $1 million a year. So you don't just have to sell to, make a lot of money and have a really good payday. Some people have, pay months and pay quarters and pay years. So for most people, though, I think when they have, one of their biggest income years would naturally be the sale of the business that they had built. So, you look at normal financials, profit, is there debt, cash flows. One thing not to overlook if you're selling or buying is owner add backs, which is to say that typically a small business owner will run a lot of personal expenses that are eligible for deduction, but that a business wouldn't normally incur. And the most infamous example of this is probably meals. So the IRS doesn't fight you on meals, but they only let you deduct 50%. I think after so many decades of people doing this, travel, people buy cars for themselves, all sorts of stuff. And so a savvy buyer should know to do those as add backs, and a savvy seller should know to do the same. Future can't be predicted, but of course that's what a buyer would typically be looking at. And then there's also the famous strategic versus financial buyer. So I've mostly been a financial buyer. I've said, well, what's the investment here? What's the payback period? And by and large, it's worked out pretty well. And I've also sold that way typically, as opposed to a strategic buyer. And a great example of that would be Facebook buying WhatsApp or Instagram. Huge purchases, right? I think, WhatsApp was in the neighborhood of like $20 billion or something. And Instagram seemed like a bargain at $1 billion, but massive amounts of money for the sellers in those cases. But the buyer, knocked out competitors. There's only a small handful of global competitors that have networks that big in terms of like the user size. And of course, the same thing happens at a much smaller scale. So strategic is also the guy or the company that's going to be buying the dream. That's the idea. If how much could you sell a pen for? Well, if you're selling a pen to somebody who's writing themselves $1 million contract, that pen's worth a whole lot more than a buck or getting it for free from somebody. And then a couple more sections here. Funding sources. Clearly, cash. A lot of companies can pay cash for a business. Loans, there's a lot of sources of financing. If you are looking to do this pretty seriously, I would encourage you to look at the SBA loan. And I can actually connect you to somebody in that office. It's not the main connection I have. Those do go through banks. Those are really frustrating. Having taken out an SBA loan in the past, I've actually done two. The paperwork is awful, but they're often the only loan that you can get, because the banks often don't do other loans because the SBA ones are guaranteed. So they're basically no risk for the bank. You would put up 5%, 10% typically, maybe a little bit more. And then the SBA covers 90%. So the bank makes its processing fees. But the bank has to do a lot of paperwork to provide to the SBA. And that's different than the disaster relief stuff, by the by. Seller held note, as I mentioned earlier, that's fantastic. I've done this a couple times. And, there has to be a really high level of trust, of course. But if you have that, it's just way smoother. It's so much easier. There's less paperwork, of course. And it's, it's risky for the seller, but the seller does have the collateral of the business that they can recover. And then rolled equity. So if you're a big company, buy a small company, the small company gets a share of the big company. I'm not going to go into distortions, but the idea here is, if you're not just like running expenses for the business, but another classic one is the owner underpays him or herself. So you're doing what's really like a $75,000, $125,000 a year job, whatever it is. You're paying yourself $30,000 or nothing at all. You look at your business, you say, oh, I'm making, it's $1 million business. I'm making $50,000 last year. Great. Well, in another sense, you're actually losing 25 if that's a $75,000 position that you're not paying yourself for. So beware of stuff like that, because it's really, really easy for you to play games with yourself. I've done that and been burned a number of times, so sort of finally improved my behavior. Next up is negotiation. I thought that these images were funny. The negotiations, of course, can be quite trying. I'm not going to go into all the negotiation tips that people use. That's its own presentation, it's its own course of study. I will say that I think it's best to have an honest and upfront conversation. If there's anything about the deal that doesn't make sense to you on either side, it seems too good to be true, say, hey, this seems to be too good to be true. Often there'll be sort of missed expectations. Sometimes somebody will try to hoodwink you. And typically the big hot potato there can be liability. It's kind of boring. Liability is often very remote, but you can't hazard something that will cause you or the business to go bankrupt. And that's what the lawyers often hash out. And I put counsel here because they're really in my experience, they're a really, really big part of the negotiation, the key part. Like you might have, the broker might give you some advice and the broker wants to do a deal. You might have some advisor, formal or informal. The investor, of course, might have a seat at the table. But your counsel is really the one that puts pressure on you on either side to accept or reject certain things, in particular to reject unacceptable liabilities. And by the way, the lawyer can be very, very expensive. It's like they can't help themselves. And a real challenge with small business transactions is that the legal bills can easily run into the tens of thousands of dollars. So if you're doing a transaction that's worth $100,000 and the legal will be 25 or of course $70,000, it's probably not worthwhile. And that has sunk a lot of transactions. So I don't necessarily advise others to do this, but I have done my own legal on some smaller deals. One, I cribbed one of the fancy ones. The lawyer still got into that one anyway, but I think I saved quite a bit of money. And I would think of that as sort of being, comfortable doing your own electrical work at home. If you do it wrong, the house could burn down. But if you know what you're doing and you've done it before, you'll probably be safe. But suffice it to say, that is something that you want to actually check in with a lawyer on and say, look, I've got this deal going on. How much is it going to cost me? And a good lawyer will give you an honest estimate, which in my case was like, $70,000 for the biggest deal that we did. Asset versus stock is another really, really important one. Stereotypically, the buyer will want it to be an asset purchase and the seller will want it to be stock. As the seller, on a lot of occasions, I haven't really cared, but the difference is that the liability stays with you. In broad terms, the liability stays with you as the stock seller. So if you sell a company shares, then the liability transfers to the buyer. So of course, the buyer typically doesn't want that. They just want the assets. So that could be software, that could be the goodwill. It's called goodwill for clients. That could be, contracts, the employees. That could be physical inventory, stuff like that. So that's one to be very tuned into, and also to seek, generally speaking, legal counsel on. But generally speaking, also, if you're the seller, you should be comfortable doing an asset sale. Now, you do still hazard stuff, and if you do this long enough, you'll probably get bit once or twice. We did an asset sale once, and there was an employee lawsuit that I had nothing to do with. It was a wrongful termination suit. I thought it was wrong. I thought the suit was totally inaccurate. But if you get sued, it's usually a shakedown, basically, from my perspective. Anyway, having been sued, the employee in question, who had been terminated by somebody else, not me, not one of the other owners, I thought didn't have a case, but we ended up settling, which was quite frustrating for me. But them's kind of the breaks, and that also, of course, can happen without a sale happening. In fact, we were really lucky because when the sale went through, there was an SBA loan involved, and whoever did the due diligence somehow missed the lawsuit, which is really bad because they're supposed to look up if there's any legal claims filed. And it was a bullet we dodged because the sale might have blown up, and both buyer and seller wanted that sale to go through at that point. So we had to then coordinate after the fact to deal with that lawsuit. So just be advised that sometimes that stuff, and that one was going to happen anyway. It would happen whether or not there was a sale. So that stuff is kind of out there. It's one of the hazards of doing business. Paperwork. You generally start with a letter of intent. The letter of intent is typically non-binding, like you don't have to sell, but it often restricts the seller from shopping the business to anybody else during a restricted phase. It might be 30 days, it might be 90 days. And sometimes the buyer will really leverage that time. So remember, Amazon's infamous for doing this. If they're talking to somebody, they have this company called Quidsi, which owned diapers.com and these other companies. And while they were negotiating with them, they started to do all these pricing things to mess with the company. And they couldn't react because they were in a meeting with Amazon that later ended up buying them. So typically, I don't think you'll get muscled like that, but it is something to be aware of. Because the letter of intent also kind of typically creates a moral contract. Even if you say, oh, we'll figure out the terms later, they're largely penciled in, and the agreement largely goes by that. Agreement, again, the big thing there is liabilities, of course, earn out, consulting, all that stuff is going to be important to figure out. Consulting can be separate from the earn out. I listened to this podcast with a guy who had a 5-year earn out, which I couldn't believe. When I sold my business, the agency, we just had 1-year consulting contracts, which was much easier, and that was very smooth too. We were able to help in a couple of key areas, but she had been the CEO, the executive, so she didn't really need our operational help too much anyway. You'll have a bunch of schedules with an agreement. A really important one there is tax. You want to agree on the tax allocations because that's going to affect the tax rate that your build as the seller. And you should ask your CPA about that. But the key question is what's goodwill and what's anything else. And then miscellaneous, there's like a bill of sale and a resolution to the shareholders and stuff like that you have to submit as well. And finally, we come to emotions. So this is something not to overlook. And one of the things that that was really meaningful for me professionally is that I took formal sales training courses after I moved here to Austin through a company called Sandler. And David Sandler is the late founder of this. And he has all these sayings and all these rules and stuff. And a lot of them are real gems. And this is one of them. Who you I is not what you are. So it's wordplay. I think it's intentionally jarring. And the I there is identity and the R there is role. So the idea is that your role as a human being, your identity as a human being, your core identity is really ultimately not your role. It may feel like it is, your role as an entrepreneur or the owner of this business or the manager of this business or whatever it is, but it's not, because you might have been doing something else, probably do something else in the future, and you probably have other roles in your life that are equally or more important. Your relationship to your family, for example, maybe hobbies you have, it could be anything. And this is really, really easy to get bound up in. And I did it for long. I was very much bound up in this and very blind to it. Although at other phases of my life, I similarly bound myself up in roles when I was in college or when I had to do certain athletics and stuff like that. So I was talking to my CPA once, and he shared the story of a guy he consulted for, another of his clients. And the guy had sold his business, and the guy found himself, he should just cry in the shower every day. And, he shared this with the CPA, and this hit him out of left field. It was just like this weird emotional release for him, sort of like somebody dying or some other big life event happening. And that's very, very common. And if it happens after the fact or not, you should be aware of it, because it may mean that you don't pull the triggers. There's all these sorts of business owners who get really close to doing a deal and then pull back, to the great consternation of whoever they were talking to, and possibly also to their own detriment. Because if you're an entrepreneur, maybe your thing is to start new businesses, or maybe your thing is to have a big win and take some time off, take the rest of your life off, whatever it is. But there's a lot of stuff that gets wound up in here. And you want to try and unpack this and take inventory if you can. So another one is you're not busy anymore. You don't have control of it anymore, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe the control was a huge pain for you, and you couldn't get rid of it soon enough. So that wraps us up. I would be happy to take any questions.
We do have one. Do local SBAs have contracts with lawyers to give discounted rates for small business owners?
Local SBAs?
Local SBAs.
What is an SBA? Like the Small Business Administration?
Yes, Small Business Association.
Oh, associations?
Mm-hmm.
So speaking from experience, I have not had a lot of luck with most organizations. So when I moved to Austin, I tried to connect with the Chamber of Commerce. And I don't want to sound negative about this, but I think Chamber of Commerce's are really largely very much development-centered groups. They want to encourage commerce for everybody, of course, and be very friendly, but it seems like they tend to really be around like physical development, like buildings and land and stuff like that. So it wouldn't hurt to talk to those guys and see if they have any kind of connections. But there are other groups out there, and I got a couple bonus slides here. So let me show you a logo. This is one that I'm part of called Entrepreneurs Organization. And I couldn't say enough good things about it because it's really changed my life. This is the one I joined after I moved to Austin. If there's one thing I could have done, if there's one thing I really wish I'd done sooner as a professional, it's that it would have been to have joined this group, because it's for businesses that are doing $1 million or more in annual revenue. And it just really helped mature me as a professional entrepreneur. I could have joined it sooner, really wish that I had. They also, and this has chapters around the world. So any major US city that you're in, there's probably a chapter or regional group at least. Now, to be fair, there's some competing groups as well. There's another group called YPO. That's not really a competitor so much. It's for bigger businesses, and you don't have to be an owner. EO kind of comes from YPO. But there's one called Vistage. That's a for-profit group. It has a different flavor. There are a few others that you can kind of find as well. I would encourage you to, find what's right for you. But EO has something called Accelerator. And if your business is doing $250,000 a year or more, you can apply for and join Accelerator, and it'll go over operational fundamentals with you. That would probably be a good network to check on for various discounts as well. But don't forget, you can always go to a business and say, hey, listen, I'm bootstrapping my business. Can you help me out here? Some companies have programs for that, some don't. If they don't have a program for it, I would kill yourself over it, because there's a lot of ways to save money as a bootstrap entrepreneur.
And then there's another question that somebody typed in a private chat to me. So question is, in your opinion, what are the top 3 most important personalities in order to sustain as a startup person, and why these 3?
So I'm a funny person to ask this, because if you looked at my personality profile, I would not be an entrepreneur. I sort of stumbled into it. So if you remember that Clueless slide, and then the other survey on when people start, my brother and I were unemployed. We had a very interesting career year. Our uncle ran for office, and we worked on his campaign, and he lost. So we were unemployed at the end of that year, and we said, well, we actually had jobs. We kind of, there's some job offers floating around there, but we said, hey, why not start something? And oh my God, if I'd known then how much work it was going to be. But, now that's all kind of in the past. So at any rate, that was a kind of a stumbling, so my wife, she's very entrepreneurial, and she has a personality profile for it. So she actually worked for a corporation, didn't like how she couldn't make more money with it. And so wrote her own business plan and launched a business. That was a personal chef business that she just sold with a seller held note. And so the important thing I think to remember is that where there's a will, there's a way. So what gives you the will? And do you know if you have it? So if you have a really high if you have a real desire to win, that's clearly going to be a bonus. And I don't have that. So if you rate me, so there's this thing called Culture Index on the bottom right of the slide. And if you email me, I'll actually send you, I pay for this as a profile thing. If you email me, I'll send you the Culture Index link and send you your results. And it's free, because I pay for a bulk subscription. And that'll indicate if you're, more competitive or more diplomatic. I'm on the diplomatic side myself, mildly so. If you were more sociable or less sociable, I'm less sociable myself. If you're more patient or more likely to initiate something, I'm actually on the more patient side myself. And then finally, if you're more likely to have follow through or delegate. And that last quality might cut either way for an entrepreneur. So I have an archetype by this system called Craftsman. This system, by the way, is not the only one that's out there. There's some other really good ones. There's one called the Objective Management Group. This tends to be for sales. There's one called the Berkman that's really good. These are all sort of similar to Myers-Briggs. I've found a lot more luck with this. I work with the consultants. It's real good insight. So I wouldn't worry about personality traits, frankly. I would say, well, hey, do I want to do something? And then do some soul searching on that. And don't be shy about talking to friends and say, listen, I'm thinking about doing this. Could you see me sort of succeeding or failing in that? And if your friends are honest, they might give you some really, really good insights on that. So it definitely helps if you're competitive. It definitely helps if you have high energy. But anybody can succeed as an entrepreneur. If I made it, you can too.
Wow, thanks for that encouragement. Go ahead. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Annie. I have a yoga company. So could I ask what your email address is?
Oh, yeah. Let me throw that in the chat right here.
and yeah, actually, I was about to ask the same question, so it's good.
Thank you.
So just to remind everyone, if you would like to ask questions, you can just unmute yourself to ask questions, or you can type your questions in the chat box. I haven't seen, well, actually, I do see a question here.
Mm-hmm.
Stephanie, do you want me to read it out, or you can read it out?
You can read it.
Okay. So there's a question for people with domain knowledge interest in starting a business, but who otherwise lack a foundation in the startup business. For example, an experienced professional in regulatory affairs, a senior chemist, etc., etc. What would you recommend to round out their business acronym?
It's a great question. I don't think there's an easy answer. So the closest thing to a curriculum that I would recommend would be something like the accelerator program that we have at Entrepreneurs Organization. That's a year-long course. There are monthly meetings. I think there's a lot of similar stuff that you could probably find at colleges. Community colleges might have that. There might be some stuff online as well, like a company like Coursera might have that. But the main thing is, if you have an idea, I wouldn't worry about those weeds because that won't really be your big challenge. Like, you'll be able to figure out the accounting portion, whether or not you have an aptitude for it. So that's something else. Like, there's a lot of aspects of the small business that you might hate doing, right? So content marketing, that's probably something that's most small businesses do. A lot of people don't love that. It's not my thing. You can hire people to do that for you, and then that just kind of goes into the business plan. We know a small business owner here, and he builds parts for satellites, and he kind of came from that background. So he worked, I think, for Steph. He worked for JPL, didn't he, out in California? And I think he worked for NASA too. At any rate, whatever his exact career history, he's that kind of guy, right? Sort of like a chemist. He was sort of an engineer, and he struck out on his own. And he has sort of a small sort of artisan kind of shop, and he's been doing it for years. And I think that's kind of going well. So I would really kind of work through. You don't have to work through the business model, because like there'll be a lot of twists and turns and unexpected things, and your customer won't be who you thought your customer was going to be. So if you can just get out there and do it and kind of start it, and ideally do it as sort of part-time hustle. Like, if you listen to a lot of people who present on small businesses, they say, hey, figure out if there's product market fit first. So one guy, he had a fancy camera, and he's like, I wonder if I can have a camera rental business. I don't remember when this was, but to figure it out, he went on a Craigslist and posted this one camera he had to see if there was demand for it. It kind of worked out. So little stuff like that, little hacks, I think would be kind of really good. I wouldn't worry about more formal education, because I think that could be sort of a treadmill you never get off of. Because you're just, realistically, honest to God, like, I sometimes wonder how we got through our first year of business. We were broke. We were so broke. We were living in my uncle's house, the same one who ran for office, and the air conditioning broke. And it was like $1,000 to fix. And we had no savings. And may as well have been $1 million. So we bought fans and just pointed the fans at our computers. And, obviously having no rent to pay was a big plus for us, but we had other costs, like, we had to do some travel and stuff that year. So however we did it, we got through, and I've seen a lot of other small business owners do the same.
Thanks for the answers. I haven't seen questions coming in, but I do see there were two questions were submitted to us in advance. So the first question is, do you need a lawyer for an operating agreement?
That's a classic one, and I think you'd probably be well advised to do it, or to you could find some stuff online, but if the business succeeds, if the business doesn't succeed, you haven't lost much, and that would probably be in like the thousands of dollars for that, maybe hundreds if you got a lawyer who's a friend. So you might find like some worksheets to like work through everything, but then I would probably recommend tying that one up with a lawyer.
I think
you don't want ambiguity with that one.
Sorry, I think you're on mute, Annie. I saw you like asking a question. I'm not positive.
Yeah, I'm a yoga entrepreneur, so it's a very big space right now, and I'm working with a lot of celebrities. And I'm kind of out of inventory, and I'm kind of sick of doing it, so I kind of do want to sell it. And I'm getting a lot of bites. So anyway, I have attorneys. I have a whole bunch of people helping me. it's exciting, but COVID is really hard for a lot of yoga people because we usually go to gyms like Equinox, or we do, or I taught at Equinox and Oracle and all this stuff, and I can't go there anymore. COVID's making things really difficult for a lot of people right now.
Well, congrats on the interest, and yeah, my condolences on the difficulties. My heart breaks when I see those headlines. I saw one that was like 30+% of businesses are closed right now, and those. I mean, that's just really tough. That's a lot of people's livelihoods and dreams, and a lot of stuff that they built. I'm very fortunate. My business is not. We're in the online space, so it really has not had. It hasn't been really beneficial to us, but it hasn't been really negative to us either.
I sell Yoga Force mats that are for alignment. So it actually works when you don't have a teacher there. So you could do it at home.
Oh, great. So yeah, you sell.
It's that home thing. And I do all these Zoom classes, but I wasn't really I didn't think that there was going to be a pandemic. So I didn't plan for there being a pandemic. So it's just, like, you have to stay healthy because you can't just stay at home and eat all day. You have to do something, right? And now they're closing down California basically again. So it's just like, damn, it's kind of hard. But you got to just move forward. Hopefully next year we're going to be okay.
How are you brokering the business?
I have Phil Schlein, who is a very famous venture capitalist, helping me. So I'm working with him.
Oh, cool.
So, and I went to Berkeley a long time before you were probably even born. So that's how anyway, I'm excited because there's so many people that are really interested, because yoga is a big business. It's a good category.
Oh yeah, yoga's great.
So even I'm starting to work with schools because these kids are on Zoom now. They need to move. So I'm working with them too. And I put myself on mute because I've got a lot of phone calls coming in.
Stephanie, I'd be happy to provide the slides if you want to send them out later.
Yeah, we actually got a couple people who want us to email them. I'll just everyone to let you know, we're going to be sending them out via Eventbrite. So if you did RSVP via Eventbrite, we already have your email. We can send it to you there. If you did not RSVP in Eventbrite, or you're watching on YouTube live right now, just shoot him an email, or shoot me an email, and then we'll send it to you. Are there any other questions? I mean, feel free to ask. Craig's looking. Craig, are you looking to ask a question? I saw you. No. We'll just, okay. Okay, thanks, Brooke. We appreciate it. That was such a fantastic talk. It's incredibly detailed, so informative. We really appreciate it. Okay, so this concludes tonight's event. Just letting you know, next Thursday, Dave Kramer is going to be our speaker, and he'll be talking about UT Austin tackling climate change. We hope you have a really great evening. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks, Brooke.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Silke. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. All right.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye.